How have a club with no money shocked the world to become one of the best teams in Europe? They were bankrupt, had lost their best player, and everyone knew that Barcelona wouldn't reach the top of European football again. The man who replaced him had an impossible task on his hands, trying to solve their debt while keeping the team competitive with no money to spend. The only way to achieve this was by taking a massive gamble, risking everything to try and make it work. Yet just a few years later, Joan Laporta has led Barcelona to glory, making them the most exciting team in football, winning trophies while building the future of the club. So how did Laporta actually manage to pull this impossible transformation off? Solving their debt crisis, yet kept on winning, investing into La Masia superstars with a brand new stadium on the way while having the best coach in world football, all while keeping Barcelona fan-owned. That's what this video will answer, showcasing the story of how a team that hit rock bottom managed to come out on top. To understand the situation Barcelona was in, check out the part 1 of this video where I go over Bartomeu's presidency and all the terrible decisions he made that led to the collapse of Barcelona. But here's what you need to know. August 2020, Barcelona had just lost 8-2 to Bayern Munich in the Champions League quarter-final. It was the most embarrassing loss in the history of the club. This came as a result of spending hundreds of millions on poor transfers and completely destroying the wage structure, forking out hundreds of millions a year for players who weren't worth it. They were spending way more than they were earning, and with the pandemic slashing revenues, Barcelona's finances took a massive hit. Bartomeu had destroyed the club, dragging the club down as far as he could. Eventually, 20,000 socios signed a vote of no confidence against Bartomeu, and before he could be kicked out, he resigned in disgrace in October 2020, leaving the club in the worst position it's ever been in. The person who was to be elected next had a massive job on their hands to try and turn Barcelona around and make them a serious team again. That man ended up being Joan Laporta, who was elected in March 2021 for the next 5 years. He had already been president once from 2003 to 2010, getting them out of a financial crisis before, so this situation wasn't new to him. Now it was time for him to do that once again. He needed to bring the team back to winning ways, figure out how to cut costs while also raising revenue, build up La Masia again, keep Messi, as well as many other long-term projects. It was a task that seemed difficult but not impossible. Well, that was until he got into office and got to see how truly bad the state of the club was. Barcelona were seriously broke. Technically, they were bankrupt as their debt was as high as 1.35 billion euros. Keeping Barcelona fan-owned was going to be Laporta's biggest challenge. It wasn't just the debt that was killing them either. In the 2021 season, they posted by far the highest losses in football of 481 million euros. Losing this much money was beyond unsustainable. They owed over 300 million in transfer fees, some of which were on players that didn't even play for the club anymore, with a wage bill that was 103% of their total income. The salary cap in La Liga was 70%. This mess inherited by Laporta meant signing Messi to a new contract became impossible. So despite trying everything, Messi sadly had to say goodbye to his childhood club. This was the first major issue Laporta had to deal with, slashing the wage bill, getting very high earners during the Bartomeu era to leave. One of them actually being Lionel Messi, who earned 555 million euros over 4 years. They also managed to clear some other names off the books to ease up the finances. Improving the team also became a challenge. With them losing the best player in their history, they needed to make sure they had at least some replacements. With the team unable to spend any money whatsoever, they resorted to signing a bunch of players on a free. And the only way they could register these signings for La Liga was by asking players to take pay cuts, most notably being Piqué, who forfeited money just so Barcelona could sign more talent. However, in the 21-22 season, Barcelona had 2 major issues they had to resolve, otherwise it would cost them massively in the long run. First was a manager. Ronald Koeman was replaced midway through the season by club legend Xavi. This was a massive risk as Xavi had only managed Qatari team Al Sadd. But much like when Laporta hired an unproven Pep in 2008, this hiring was about changing the club culture, bringing the Barcelona DNA back. Secondly was signing more attackers. With Messi and Griezmann gone and Aguero having retired due to a heart condition, Barcelona found themselves severely lacking firepower. Heading into January 2022, they were in 6th place, struggling for wins. If they didn't qualify for the Champions League by finishing top 4, it'd mean that their revenue would take a massive hit. So the club had to go back to the transfer market to sign some attackers, spending more money they didn't have and taking a massive risk to try and qualify for the Champions League. This risk of signing attackers paid off, as in the second half of the season, they finished second place and qualified for the Champions League, which was a must for them. However, they were still far off the pace, 13 points off the league leaders, and they were knocked out of the Champions League group stage only to then lose in the Europa League quarter-final against Frankfurt. All this while still having some major problems heading into the 22-23 season. The club needed at least 500 million euros immediately just to stay afloat. There were a few ways to generate this massive funds quickly: joining a breakaway Super League, selling their best players and becoming a mid-table team, or the doomsday option of selling the club, which would destroy the very essence of Barcelona. None of them were viable options. There was, however, one really risky way to generate loads of money. Before taking the massive risk, Laporta needed to clear up some things first. They partnered with Spotify to become the official sponsor of the club, now on all their kits and getting naming rights to their stadium too, in a deal worth 280 million over 4 years. They also restructured their debt to give them more time to pay it off. And finally, the club announced they were renovating the Camp Nou for around 1 billion euros. This meant taking on more debt, but this debt is separate to the 1.35 billion and would be paid off using the massive increase in stadium revenue they would be generating with the new ground, hoping it can also clear their outstanding debt while making the club even more money in the long term. However, none of these solutions were short-term solutions. They still needed 500 million as soon as possible, which led to the most controversial decision Laporta has ever made, but one he believed was absolutely necessary: the infamous economic levers, selling future revenues to raise big money in the short term. The levers included 25% of the next 25 years of La Liga broadcasting revenue for 530 million euros, which is about 21 million a year, and 25% of Barcelona's broadcasting revenue brings in about 40 million a year, so a massive undercut. They also sold 49% of Barcelona studios for 200 million to two companies, a 730 million total cash injection. This was seen as a massive risk and a heavy discount. They had food for today but could starve tomorrow. But Barcelona didn't have any other option. 125 million went to paying some of their debt. The rest was used to cover their spending costs, as they were spending way more than they were earning. Although there was one thing Laporta spent money on that people didn't quite understand. In the 22 summer window, Barcelona spent 150 million and signed 8 players, including Lewandowski, Kessie and Christensen on a free, and beat out multiple teams for Rafinha and Koundé. A team in debt spending hundreds of millions didn't really make sense to anyone. Well, to Laporta, this was a calculated risk. He wanted to keep Barcelona competitive and believed that winning would actually generate more money. Therefore, these new signings were seen as an investment. Barcelona also offloaded a bunch of players, getting rid of about 200 million off the wage bill. Plus, thanks to more players taking pay cuts and deferring wages, it helps with registering the new signings. From the outside looking in, it was a mess, but Barcelona actually managed to have some positives in the 22-23 season. Their signings paid off, hitting the ground running under Xavi as the team looked much stronger. First, Xavi changed the club culture. Along with his former teammate Sergio Busquets as captain, they managed to bring back some of the discipline from the 2010s. Tactically, the team were more disciplined too. Their defensive numbers under Xavi were world class, conceding just 20 league goals with Ter Stegen keeping 26 clean sheets, which was a La Liga record. Attacking wise, it wasn't the best. The team had a record 11 1-0 wins, and the football wasn't the most entertaining, but with a striker like Lewandowski up front, he single-handedly decided the outcomes of games, managing to win the Golden Boot that year with 23 goals. With the new signings contributing heavily to Barcelona's good form, it was a different group of players that had a bigger impact. La Masia. Xavi was the perfect manager to give young players a pathway into the first team. Xavi and Balde became prominent features in the first team under Xavi, and with Pedri already a young star, it meant the young core of the team was starting to shape up very well. And there was one player he gave a debut to that was really important. Towards the end of the season, he brought a 15-year-old Lamine Yamal off the bench to show the confidence he had in the teenager. Thanks to Xavi and Laporta's massive gamble, Barcelona managed to win the league that year, just 1 year after nearly going bankrupt. It was a miracle they managed to even stay alive as a club, let alone win the league title. While it's easy to get caught up in the celebrations, it's important to note that Barcelona was still in deep trouble. Their performances in Europe were still terrible, getting knocked out of the Champions League group stage yet again before being beaten in the Europa League round of 32 by Man United. The club also still needed to cut costs. Without the financial levers, the club would have lost 210 million euros that year. They were still overspending due to old wages and transfer fees, and the levers were a temporary solution. Going into the 23-24 season, their finances needed a major overhaul. La Liga told them they had to cut 200 million from the budget before spending any money. This wasn't helped by the fact they had to play outside of the Camp Nou while it was being renovated, meaning they were losing 90 million a year in revenue. Laporta's job already seemed impossible, but this made things 10 times harder. The first of their cost-cutting measures was letting two club legends, Busquets and Alba, leave on a free. Both were massive earners. Alba even graciously wrote off 20 million of the 40 million he was owed in wages. As for the other outgoings, they let other big earners leave on a free, loaned out some players, and even sold some high potential young talent just to raise some funds. However, the big sell of the summer was losing Dembele for only 50 million euros to PSG due to some hidden release clause in his contract. This shocked everyone, especially Xavi, who highly rated him, and considering the player he is today, this was a major mistake. With the team losing key players, Barcelona wanted to recruit talent to bolster the team, except the club literally had no money to pay for anyone. That summer they signed 5 players and spent next to nothing on fees, as it was all they could afford. Despite the team on the pitch not improving, the finances did. Out of the 200 million they needed to cut, they cut 161 million, with their wages going from 73% of their income to just 54%. A miraculous turnaround to drop that low, but still more cuts were needed. Unfortunately, because they couldn't spend any money in the transfer window, their performances took a massive hit. Felix and Cancelo didn't make the biggest impact. Romeu wasn't Busquets, and with losing 2 club legends, the leadership in the dressing room suffered, something Gundogan spoke about during his time there. While Xavi coached a defensive masterclass the season before, in the 23-24 season, their defense suffered while remaining pretty weak in attack. The results dropped and fans became impatient with the team. None of this was helped by the fact the team dealt with many injuries. Frankie de Jong, Balde and Xavi all missed many months of the season due to injuries. Barcelona finished the season trophyless, losing badly in the Supercopa to Real Madrid, then getting knocked out the Copa del Rey to Bilbao before suffering a Champions League quarter-final exit to PSG, all while watching their biggest rivals win the League and Champions League with no striker. For as much work that went on behind the scenes, the season still felt like a failure. Xavi, who is Barcelona through and through, said that managing the club was damaging his mental health. The job wasn't fun, and it was pretty much impossible to coach a team that had so many issues. The only positive they could take away from the season was the fact that La Masia was still producing world-class talent. Lamine Yamal was thrown into the deep end after a lack of attacking options and performed surprisingly well at just 16. His youth teammate Pau Kubasi at 17 also burst onto the scene quickly, showing his maturity and earning a starting role. Alongside the likes of Fermin Lopez and Hector Fort, Xavi was able to give all of them opportunities to make the first team and develop world-class talent for free through their academy. As for Xavi, however, he was on his way out. Him and Laporta just didn't see eye to eye. Xavi believed they needed big signings to compete. Laporta believed he had the squad to win. So Laporta sacked Xavi. A bold move, but turns out this decision was about to completely change Barcelona forever. However, he still had to deal with more financial issues going into the 24-25 season. Remember that 90 million Barcelona were going to lose from temporarily moving stadium? Well, that came back to bite them. Along with other revenue issues, Barcelona now needed to raise 130 million euros if they wanted to sign and register any players. They had to, yet again, get rid of high earners while selling some young talent to try and raise money, all while trying to keep the team competitive. They also negotiated a new kit deal with Nike and had just one more lever to pull. They sold a small fraction of their VIP seats of their new stadium to a foreign investor for 25 million euros. This was somehow enough to raise the funds. It meant they could sign and register their only 2 signings of the window that year, Pau Victor and Dani Olmo, for 55 million. It was all a scramble. Barcelona were fighting for survival, barely had money to spend, still had $1 billion in debt hanging over their head, weren't in their new stadium yet, and a team that went trophyless didn't improve on paper. All of this while their biggest rivals, who just did the double, had signed the best player in the world for free. Competing with Real Madrid or anyone in Europe was going to be impossible. They just couldn't keep up financially anymore. But Laporta was patient. Although he couldn't spend money, he managed to finally balance the books, no longer spending more than they were earning. The finances were starting to get sorted, but the on-field performances were still an uncertainty. Except Laporta's decision to sack Xavi changed their fortunes. Laporta believed the squad was good enough, and so he hired a coach who believed that too. In comes Hansi Flick, aka Hansi, a world-class manager with Bayern Munich and ex-Germany coach. He believed he could win with this team. He was the same coach who got the best out of Lewandowski and beat Barcelona 8-2. But could he really bring the best out of this team? He wasn't helped by the fact the team had a lot of major injuries. Araujo, Christensen and ter Stegen missed most of the season, and they had to bring in Szczesny out of retirement just to replace him. And their Busquets region Marc Bernal tore his ACL at the beginning of the season. Yet despite this, Flick's Barcelona team were the most scary, intense, entertaining and attacking team in all of world football. They kept high possession but were direct and attacking. Thanks to the likes of Pau Cubarsí, Pedri and De Jong, they were able to make line-breaking passes, splitting teams apart through the middle. They also had elite width thanks to Balde and Yamal flying up the wings, creating a ton of space for Rafinha, Lewandowski or Olmo through the middle. And if you pressed up to cover the space, well, Rafinha and Yamal could easily run in behind, and their elite passes will find them every time. With 3 different ways to attack teams, defenses didn't know how to contain them. They were creating chances like no other team. Lamine Yamal and Rafinha found freedom in this system to pick apart teams however they wanted, scoring goals at a high rate, and then creating many chances for Lewandowski, who at 36 was still tucking away chances with ease. If you dared to let Lamine or Rafinha dribble, they would embarrass your defenders. With the individual brilliance of the front three and the elite system Hansi implemented, these guys became the deadliest trio in Europe, seemingly overnight. Lewandowski was supposed to be too old, Lamine too young, and Rafinha was branded not good enough. Yet now these guys were dominating teams for fun, scoring and assisting more than ever before. The numbers these 3 put up were scary. Rafinha had a Ballon d'Or level season, while Yamal put up record-breaking numbers for a 17-year-old. In terms of team goals, Barcelona scored the most goals in Europe this season, with 145 goals in the League and Champions League combined. Their attack was better than ever. Defensively, it was intense. They squeezed opponents high up the pitch, meaning their backline was nearly always in the opposition half. It did mean that 2 good passes and the opposition could be in behind. It was a consequence of the system, but one Flick was not willing to compromise on. It did mean conceding some wild goals where it looked like their defense was non-existent, but the team is young and the system is new. Over time with experience, they will get better at playing so high up the pitch. Under Hansi Flick, literally every single player on the team got better. Martinez, Ferran Torres and Eric Garcia all became valuable team members, while Koundé, Cubarsí, Balde, De Jong, Pedri, Fermin Lopez and the front three and more all saw uptick in their production. Everyone improved. The result of all of this meant a Barcelona team that won a lot. Their fierce rivals Real Madrid, who at the start of the season was supposed to be the scariest team on the planet, couldn't touch them. Barca beat them 4 times in a row, scoring 16 goals against them, beating them 5-2 in the Supercopa final, 3-2 in the Copa del Rey final, and 4-3 to all but seal the La Liga title. Meaning on 3 different occasions this season, Barcelona won trophies by beating their biggest rivals. Domination. The only thing that robbed them of the perfect season was reaching the Champions League semi-final against Inter Milan, playing the most thrilling semi-final you'll ever see. They came back from 2-0 down in the second leg to take a 3-2 lead after Rafinha's goal in the 87th minute. It should have been all but over, but Acerbi scored a last-second equalizer before Davide Fratesi scored in extra time to win it for Inter. And if it wasn't for Jan Sommer, Barcelona could have found themselves in the Champions League final with the chance at a quadruple. However, a domestic treble, after all the financial turmoil and barely having money to spend, was nothing short of a miraculous turnaround from the team, the coach, and Joan Laporta. A team with no business being this dominant have just built one of the most exciting football clubs of the future. With the club now spending within their means, it means their budget for the upcoming season has gone from negative hundreds of millions to an actual sizable budget. With this, they took care of certain business first, mainly a new contract for their star player, an 18-year-old who's on track to be one of the greatest football. Also tied down Rafinha till 2028 and Hansi Flick until 2027. They signed goalkeeper Jean Garcia for 25 million euros and extended Chesney for 2 years, meaning ter Stegen could be on his way out. The club are also looking to sign another attacker for more depth. With a strong transfer window, Barcelona could very well take the next step to be European champions once again. Add on to the fact they now have a world-class coach, multiple world-class La Masia graduates with more still coming through the pipeline, a strong team and a new stadium to go to which will generate massive revenue for them. It's not far-fetched to say Joan Laporta has worked a miracle with this club and that they really could be great once again. They're not 100% in the clear, however. The 1.35 billion euro debt accumulated under Bartomeu is still over 1 billion euros, and UEFA just last month fined Barcelona 15 million for their use of economic levers in 2022, and they will have to pay 45 million euros in 2 years if they don't turn a profit, but that probably won't happen. Regardless, the fact Barcelona in 4 years went from a struggling team, nearly bankrupt with no hope in sight, trading their future just to try and keep the club fan owned, to the team with the brightest future while keeping the essence of Barcelona is nothing short of amazing.